Last week we talked about multi-digit multiplication, understanding that you could take any two numbers and multiply them, like 926 times 16, and we can find an answer for this. Today we're going to add to it. So as I work through this problem, we're going to repeat the process, and I'll do both versions, the standard algorithm and the area model. So 6 times 6 is 36. Regroup your 3 to the top. 6 times 2 is 12. Add 3 more is going to be 15. Again, regroup to the top. 6 times 9 is 54. Plus 1 is 55. Now, as I look through some of your guys' benchmarks, this is where many of you guys were stopping. Remember, we have only multiplied by only our ones digit thus far. We still have a whole nother digit to worry about. So do not forget, now we're going to multiply by the tens place, and to do that, we are going to put a 0 for a placeholder in our ones because we can't multiply anything by 10 and come out with any ones whatsoever. So we're going to multiply the 1 times the 6 for 6. Let's scratch these out real quick. And we're going to have 1 times 2 for 2 and 1 times 9 for 9. Now we're going to add these up. 6 plus 0 is 6. 5 plus 6 is 11. So we're going to put our 1 down here, regroup. 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 1 more is 8. 5 plus 9 is 14. So multiplying 926 times 16 is going to give us a product of 14,816. Let's verify this by looking at the area model. So I'm going to draw my box, and then I'm going to look at how many digits I'm looking at, or I'm working with. On the top you can see we have 3 digits. Therefore, as we talked about last week, I must have 3 spaces. Okay? My bottom number is 2 digits. Therefore, on my box, I must have 2 spaces. So in the top, we're going to break apart our number into expanded form. Well, 926 is just that. 926. And my bottom number, 16, doesn't sound quite like that, but it's really just a 10 and a 6. Again, we're going to multiply through and fill up our boxes. 10 times 900 is the same thing as 1 times 9, which is 9, and put your zeros back into your box. So 900 times 10 is nothing more than 9,000. 10 times 20 is going to be 200, or again, 1 times 2 equals 2, and I have 2 zeros that I'm multiplying with. In our third box, 10 times 6 is 60, part of our math facts. Now we're going to go to the bottom one. We're going to multiply 6 times 900, or 6 times 9, which is 54. And I have 2 zeros here, no zeros there, so I'm going to put the 2 zeros that I have in my box. Then we're going to go to the middle. 6 times 20, or 6 times 2, which is 12. And I have 1 0 that I'm working with. And my last one, 6 times 6, is 36. Now, just like last week, we took these numbers, we made them from largest to smallest, and we went down and we added them up. I'm going to do the exact same thing here. 200, 120, 60, 36. Again, it is so very important that you are very neat about doing this. See how my numbers are all nice and lined up straight? So I have all these zeros and 6. If we add them together is just 6. 2 plus 6 is 8. Plus 3 more is 11. I'm going to regroup. 4 plus 2 is 6. Plus 1 more is 7. Plus 1 more yet is 8. 9 plus 5 is 14. So 2 ways we have shown that 926 times 16 is 14,816. Now here's the question. How can we prove that using the inverse operation? Well, that's where division comes in, and that's what we're going to look at this week. So I'm going to take my product, which is my answer to a multiplication problem. So I have 10,400 4,816. So 14,816. I'm going to draw my little division house. This is also called a dividend. It's what you're dividing up. And I'm going to choose one of my two numbers to divide by. I'm going to choose the smaller number because I think it's going to make dividing easier. Okay? This is also called your divisor. That's what you're dividing by. Your answer up on top is going to be called your quotient. So in this case, I'm going to do the standard algorithm first. I'm going to look at the numbers that I have in my divisor and I'm going to compare them to my dividend. Okay? Obviously my dividend is going to be a bigger number than my divisor overall. But we're going to look at these and broken down digit per digit. So I'm going to start with my 1. Okay? My 1 is smaller than my divisor, so I cannot break that down any farther. That is not going to be able to happen. So I'm going to go to my next one. So I'm going to look at 14. Well, 14 is still smaller than 16, so it's not going to be divisible. So now I'm going to come over to my third number. So now I'm looking at the number 148, and I'm looking to divide it by 16. Well, this is not something that we can easily do in our head, but we can use estimation to help figure out where we're at and how many times we can fit 16 into 148. So if you think about your multiples of 16, okay, 16 plus 16 equals 32. So right there, how many 16s do I have? I have 2. If I do it again, that's going to be 48. Well, right there, I have another 16. That's 3. You could sit here and go through and add by 16 until you got all the way up to 148. But that might take a while, won't it? But think about it this way. If we know that 3 16s makes 48, then we can assume that 6 16s is going to get us very close to 100. See, 1, 2, 3 gets us to close to 50. So if we double that, that's going to get us close to 100. Well, we're trying to get to 148. So what happens if we do it a third time? So now we're talking about 9 16s is going to get us fairly close to 150. So let's give it a shot. We're going to do a little guess and check. Now, you see where I put my 9. I put it right above the 8 because that's the last number in this series of numbers that we're working with. It is the smallest digit that we're dividing at this time. Okay? So if I take and I put my 9 up here, then I'm going to multiply 9 times 6, which is 54. I only have room for one digit. So I'm going to put my regroup out here above the ones place in my divisor. Then I'm going to take 9 times 1, which is 9, plus 5 more, which is 14. Looky there. By using simple estimation, we got fairly close to 148 or 150 without going over. So what I've done is I've made sure that I still have room left, but not more than what I'm dividing by. So if I look at these and I do my subtraction, 8 minus 4 is 4, 4 minus 4 is 0, 1 minus 1 is also 0. So I have 4 left over. I can put 9 groups of 16 into 148 and have 4 left over. Now I still have 2 numbers sitting off to the side that we haven't done anything with. So we are going to bring these down one at a time. So I'm going to bring my 1 down and I'm going to plop it in next to my remainder. Okay, so now I'm not just looking at 4, I'm actually looking at the number 41. Well, looking at what we started with over here, we know that 16 plus 16 is 32, or if I have 2 16s, and if I have 3, I get to 48. Well, 48 is too many, so we've got to stay a number less than 41. That only leaves us with 32 as an option. So I'm going to put my 2 up here above the 1 because that's the last digit that I'm working with. 2 times 6 is 12. Cross that out. I'm going to put my regroup up there. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 32. Same thing we got when we added 16 and 16. So now I'm going to subtract. Okay, the point of this is to bring our number down. I have to regroup to start. So now I have 11 minus 2, which is 9, 3 minus 3, which is 0. 9 is smaller than 16, so we know that we got as close as we could without going over. But it's also too small to divide by. So now I'm going to bring down my last remaining digit, and I'm going to bring it all the way down and put it right next to my remainder. So now I'm not only looking at the number 9, but I'm actually looking at the whole number of 96. Okay? So we decided that 2 16s is 32, 3 16s is 48. Well, 48 is pretty close to 50, and 96 is pretty close to 100. So what happens if we were to double that? How many 16s would I have then? Well, if I doubled it, I would have 6. And I'm going to assume, by estimating, that 6 16s is going to get me fairly close to 100. If you think about it, it sounds like the same analogy I used when we decided how many 16s would fit into 148. So I'm going to go with 6. Well, 6 times 6 is 36. I'm going to cross that out, and I'm going to regroup my 3. Then I have 6 times 1, which is 6, plus 3 more, which is 9. So what you see is that I had 96 still to work with. 16 times 6 is 96, so when I subtract those out, I have nothing left. Okay? So what we're looking at is to make sure that our quotient is going to match up to our original number at the top. Well, if you see, we multiplied 926 times 16 and came out with 14,816. So in this way, I have 14,816. I divided it by 16, which was this number here, and guess what's left over? I have 926. So I know that this is a true and correct answer. Now, we have a second way to do this that some of you might understand a little bit better. It can look a lot like the area model. So I'm going to draw my box, and we're going to set it up just slightly different. Instead of putting our grid in like we did up here for multiplication, when we do the area model or the partial quotient for division, we're going to do it just a little bit differently, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my end number, which is 14,816, and I'm going to put it down below, all right? And then I'm going to say that I'm going to take my 16 and I'm going to put it out here, all right? Now, I did this briefly last week, and we're going to see how much you guys remember. We talked about making some easy multiplications off to the side. Well, 16 times 1 is 16. 16 times 2 is 32. We had 16 times 3 because we did some addition and some guess and check up here, so we might as well use it. It's 48. And then I'm going to leave a little space, and I'm going to say 16 times 10 equals 160. Now, if you look, we're working with a really big number, 14,816. So we're going to have to be able to bring this down. So maybe on this one, I'm going to multiply 16 times 100, and I'm going to get 1,600. That's still going to be bigger than anything I'm working with, but it's smaller than the number that we're talking about overall. Now, if I multiplied 16 by 1,000, I'm going to come out with 16,000. Now, 16,000 is going to be too big because I'm only starting out with 14,816. So we're going to realize immediately that that's not going to work. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at these numbers. Okay? And we're going to decide if we can use any of these numbers to subtract down what we're talking about. So I'm going to immediately notice that 1,600 or 1,600 is the biggest number I'm working with, and since I'm starting with 14,000, that's unfortunately going to have to be about the best number that we can start with. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to put 100 in my box, and then I'm going to subtract 1,600. So 6 minus 0 is 6, 1 minus 0 is 1, 8 minus 6 is 2, 4 minus 1 is 3, and 1 minus nothing is 1. So already we brought our number down by 1,600. Now, we're going to have to do this process a few times, as you can see, because we've got a very big number to work with. Now, the other thing that we could do is we could come back to our numbers and we could look at something like 16 times 5. Okay? We know that 16 times 3 is 48. We also looked up here when we added our 16s up to find some groupings. We realized that 4 16s is 64. Well, what happens if we went one more? 6 plus 4 is 10. Regroup. 6 plus 1 is 7, plus 1 more is 8. So we know that 16 times 5 is 80. Now, can we use this to help bring our number down a little faster, understanding that right now 100 is the biggest number that we're working with? So if I take 16 times 500, for example, well, I know that 16 times 5 is 80. Okay, we can do that. And then I have 2 zeros left to work with. Well, 8,000 is a pretty good sized number, is it not? But it's smaller than what we have. So maybe this would be a better idea. So now I'm going to put 500 in here, and I'm going to subtract 8,000 off of my number. That's going to bring this thing down really fast. So 6 minus 0 is 6, 1 minus 0 is 1, 2 minus 0 is 2, and I have 13 minus 8 for 5. So I have 5,216 left. Now we can come back again and look at the numbers that we have. And one of the things that you can kind of start to see and or figure out is that we have 16 times 3, which is 48. Well, what happens if we made that 300? Well, 16 times 300 would be 4,800. Because 16 times 3 is 48. We're working with 2 zeros, so we add them onto the end. Oh, look, we can bring this number down again in a big chunk. So if I write 300 in here, and I'm just going to move this number back up here so I've got some place to work with, and I'm going to subtract 4,800. So 6 minus 0 is 6, 1 minus 0 is 1. I'm going to have to do a little regrouping here. So 12 minus 8 is 4, and 4 minus 4 is 0. So now I've brought my original number of 4,816 all the way down to 416. That's made a really, really big difference. Now we can stop looking at some of these crazy big numbers and we can look at some smaller ones. So coming back and looking at it, we have 16 times 10, which is 160. That's going to be fairly close to what we're looking for. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put a 10. And I'm going to subtract 160. So 6 minus 0 is 6. Need to do some regrouping. 11 minus 6 is 5, and 3 minus 1 is 2. So we brought ourselves down another 160. Well, we're only at 256, so we've got room to do one more. So we're going to write another 10 up there, and let's put our number up here so that I've got some room. And I'm going to write 160 underneath it. So 6 minus 0 is 6. We need a little regrouping help here. So 15 minus 6 is 9. That brought us all the way down to 96. Okay. So if we look at the numbers that we have left to work with, 160 is going to be too big because we're under 100. We've got 16 times 5, which is 80. So we could do that. I could put a 5 here. We can write 80 there. We can subtract it. And I have 16 left. Well, 16 times 1 is 16. So we can put a 1 up there, write a 16 here, and we come out with 0. Now, we have one step left to do to make this work. We have to go through and add all this up. Again, we need to make sure that we're writing our numbers largest to smallest. So I have 500, 300, 100. I have 10, 10, 5, 1. And I'm going to add these up. Now I didn't make my box really big enough to hold all this, so I'm just going to have to write it off to the side. But I'm going to add up all my zeros, and I have a 5 and a 1 at the bottom for 6. I have 1, 2 in my tens column, and then I have 5 plus 3, which is 8, plus 1 more for 9 in my hundreds column. And that is your quotient, 926, which also matches what we did up here. And if you go all the way back to the beginning, there's 926 there, 926.